Hi, and welcome to the Kelley Kitley podcast, America's Social Worker Unfiltered, where every week I have hopeful, honest, and deeply human conversations with changemakers. And this week for episode 55, I decided that I wanted to do a solo episode. I am your host and your guest today, and the topic is women's mental health. First and foremost, I'm coming off of 10 days of a lot of travel, and we drove our two oldest kids to the University of South Carolina. And we had two cars and six of us and the dog. And the first leg, we drove from Oak Park, where we live, straight through to Columbia, South Carolina. And towards the end, it was storming and pouring rain. And as a mom, I was just having a lot of emotions. Our oldest is going to be a junior. And we were so thrilled that our freshman daughter decided to go to the same school as her brother. And it had been the first time that all six of us had been together for a couple of months because our older son was living with his grandparents over the summer and working at a restaurant at the Jersey Shore. And so I savored these 48 hours that we had together. And I was having a lot of feelings. You know, it changes the family dynamic. To away at college, it's just my husband and I and our two high school kids at home now. And we left feeling really hopeful and excited. And, it just pulls on the heartstrings no matter how excited we can be for our kids. And what I teach people in therapy is that we can be both excited and scared. We can have two feelings at the same time. But drop-off went great, and then we drove from Columbia, South Carolina to Alexandria, Virginia to visit some more family, my sister-in-law and her husband and their three boys, and it was lovely. It was a great way to transition from dropping the kids off at school to three rambunctious little boys, distracting, and then we woke up the next morning and the four of us went to the Jersey Shore, where, as if you've been following me for a while or read my book, you know that is such a sacred space for me. It's a place I can unplug. The ocean just soothes me and relaxes my nervous system. It's a place that I can recharge and connect with my husband. And I recognized it was my 26th summer going to the Jersey Shore. So I was excited. I had to work a little bit, which was okay. But the weather was gorgeous. We spent a lot more time with family and, also experiencing aging parents, aging in-laws, and just 20 grandkids getting older and living their life. So I was feeling it all and trying to embrace it, and also keeping up with my own mental health by journaling and walking on the beach and listening to music and eating really good food and having good conversations. This feels so weird that I'm just talking to you and myself without having a conversation. That just popped up in my head, and I needed to say that because I feel like I'm talking a lot. But if I'm not talking, nobody else is. So I'll go with it. And we were heading back on Monday morning. We didn't caravan. Um, I brought my daughter, our dog, and she had a friend who flew out to meet us back. I was driving 13 hours, and I love car time too. It's really therapeutic for me. I listen to podcasts and audibles and really good music. And we stopped for gas on the first leg of the trip. And I opened my phone to check my text messages and my emails. And Hayden Panettiere's face pops up and it says that she had died on Sunday night. And this was first thing Monday morning. And it was like a gut punch. I thought it was fake news at first, and then I started scrolling and I was reading all of the updates on the news platforms and in People Magazine and Us Weekly, and it was my feed was saturated with what had happened to her. And the point of today is not to speculate or point fingers. The point of today is really just to talk about what my mission is as a licensed clinical social worker and the work that I have done in my practice as a social worker over the past 25 years, and also my connection to Hayden and why I feel that so many people are struggling right now with the news. Millennials are struggling, moms are struggling, the recovery community is struggling, and it just feels really heavy. So anyway, I recognized this wasn't fake news. And, 3 months ago, Hayden released her book, This Is Me, A Reckoning. It was a bestseller. She was on book tour. I was so excited that she was coming to the Chicagoland area because I had been in touch with her publicist about partnering on a project that I was working on, hopefully having her on my podcast. But that was in May. And the exchange that I had with her was lovely. I guess I should back up and say, I am not a millennial and I didn't know much about her until the show Nashville came out. And one of the writers of the show, who I went to high school with, had known that I had been doing a lot of mental health work in the postpartum depression space. And I'm a women's mental health expert. And she reached out to me and she said that they were doing an episode about her character, Hayden's character, Juliette Barnes, who was struggling with postpartum depression and alcohol use disorder, and they wanted to get it right. And so I was so honored to educate them, talk about, some options for treatment paths that often women go through, signs and symptoms, and it felt really good to put some of my work into practice that way on a platform that was so large. And, you know, the reason this is important is because I've been trying to move the needle in terms of looking at the way we talk about mental health, especially women's mental health, the way we look at alcohol use along a spectrum. And so this was really my first opportunity right after I had released my book as well. And yes, it's glamorous and it is fun, and I've met a lot of celebrities doing this work and have been on a lot of the same shows that Hayden had been on promoting her book, Live with Kelley and Mark, Tamron Hall show, Today Show. And the reason it's so important is because the reach of the audience is so large. And sometimes, as we can see on social media, which is relative now, as things will go viral and people will start talking about it. And so it expands the reach. And so, little did I know at the time when I was psychoeducating the writers of the show Nashville that Hayden was simultaneously going through some of the same struggles that her character was. And that came out later. But I had been in touch with her publicist, as I mentioned. I really wanted to talk to her about her journey with postpartum depression, what it was like being in the public eye, and having everybody watch her recovery process and her needing to take a leave from the show so that she could go to treatment. And so fast forward, her in January of 2026, and I was working on the second edition of my book and talking about the Sober Curious movement. Her publicist had told me that she was going to be releasing a memoir. And I was so excited to read it. And as I mentioned, I was even more excited to have the chance to go to her book signing. And when I got there, um, I got the book right away, and there was a little bit of a wait in line. I think it was 45 minutes or an hour, and I started devouring it right there. And I say this because if you haven't read her book, one of the reasons I created this podcast was to give people resources for a host of mental health issues that people might be struggling with: parenting, finances, relationships. And the podcast is only about 30 minutes long, but then for people to be able to look up the person who is a guest on the podcast and either read about some of the work that they're doing and find out ways that you can get involved, or listen to their podcast, or read their book. And so when I met her, I looked at her. There was a table between us, and I looked at her and I said, "Thank you so much for sharing your experience, strength, and hope. And I wanted to let you know that I was a consulting therapist for the writers' room for Nashville, to educate them about postpartum depression." And both of our eyes welled up, and she said, "Can I give you a hug?" And we embraced. And I told her that I was a woman in long-term recovery, and we just talked briefly about postpartum depression and how important it was for women to have hope and to hear other women's stories, because so many of us see ourselves in other people's stories. And I have found that that is a huge part of the way that people can relate and ultimately heal and recover. So I strongly believe that storytelling saves lives. Whew, just saying that like took my breath away, because I don't know what happened, but there is speculation that it was an overdose, maybe an accidental overdose. I don't know. To me, it doesn't even matter. She's gone. And so here is a woman who had every resource available to her, and didn't make it. And that's why this work is so important. Mental health and addiction is about life and death. And I think that's why it hits so hard. I mean, whether you're a mom or a partner of somebody who watched your wife or partner experience postpartum depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder with intrusive thoughts. I mean, I worked for the Bump Club as a resident expert for several years, educating the public about the umbrella of what postpartum depression looks like. And, another thing we've been seeing in the news is when postpartum depression becomes psychosis and the result of that. Oftentimes, even when I'm doing an intake with clients, people will say, well, I don't have thoughts about killing my child. And that is a misconception about what postpartum depression is. It is along a spectrum. And, Hayden's daughter is now 11, and my heart breaks for her and what the road that she's going to have ahead of her. But what was so inspiring to me in reading Hayden's book, This Is Me, A Reckoning, was that there were several themes throughout that I found in my own story, about the estrangement of a parent, about the struggle of perfectionistic qualities and people pleasing that I had struggled with for a long time, body image issues, trauma, and then ultimately addiction. And so I was so hopeful for her. She came out the other side and she endured so much. And it's apparent from things that I've been reading, and I've uh, been obsessed, to be quite honest, finding out, who's speaking about what happened to her, who was with her, what happened. And like I said, it doesn't matter, but it's also trying to find a solution, or not a solution, an answer is what I think people are looking for. What happened? What could have been done to save her, so to speak? But addiction doesn't discriminate in race, age, socioeconomic status. And so I guess this is a public service announcement of sorts to say that we need to continue to check on each other and really ask how somebody's doing, and to not be afraid to point something out that you might see in somebody. If you notice that their mood may be down, or they seem to be distracted, or their behaviors are different, or who they're hanging around with. I think that's a big piece of this puzzle too, with her on again, off again boyfriend that she had filed a restraining order against for 5 years because of domestic abuse. And there are just so many layers to this story. And I think sometimes we can make up stories, or put blame on people. And I really want to try to encourage people not to do that. I think that when something like this happens in the media, it allows us to have really candid conversations, and it opens up the conversation and changes the conversation too. I think a lot of people that I've seen on social media have been saying me too. I've related to a lot of her story, and just the fact that she was so young. I mean, it's tragic no matter how old somebody is. And, another component that it brought up for me that I had written a little bit about during COVID was that I had lost one of my clients to an accidental overdose. He had been sober and working a program, and had a sponsor and went to meetings, and his doctor reached out to me over COVID, reporting that we had lost yet another one to this horrible disease. So that's all it takes, is one time. And it is a brain disease too, in terms of the way we think about things, and we never know what's going on inside somebody's head. And something that keeps coming up that Hayden said in her book was, there's so much more to the story than the picture shows. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. When somebody might look like they're okay, or they may look like they have it all, or seem to be thriving, we don't know anybody's whole story unless they tell us. And so I think that a lot of layers that maybe Hayden was struggling with after the death of her brother. And I know there was a death of somebody that she had been a co-star in a show of, and just tragedy after tragedy, and what it takes to heal from something like that is a daily process. And it doesn't just go away. I mean, a word she used too was radical acceptance, and trying to do her best and leave the world a better place than when she found it. And so those are things that I'm going to hold on to. And I experienced in those few minutes that I got to meet her, that bright light, and that hope that she seemed to exude. And I do believe that was real in that moment. And I don't know what happened before that or after that. But those moments are all that we have. And it's a reminder of how precious this life is too, no matter what anybody's struggling with. And I think that even in my practice with a lot of people I work with who, maybe can afford private pay therapy, or vacations, or have a good job or a great house, they oftentimes say, I feel like I don't have permission to be depressed or anxious. And, externally, I seem to have all the things, and people think my life is wonderful, but it's all relative. And so, my mission is going to continue on the path that it has been to champion for women, to champion for changes in policy and care for women in mental health and addiction. And it's just going to make me work harder. And my promise to all of you is to continue to do that. And there are some days that it feels tiresome, and some days that I lose hope or feel discouraged by a story like this, and wonder myself the why or what could have been different. But when I get quiet, that voice is in there, of just keep doing the next right thing. So I never thought that I would feel so grateful to be a woman in recovery, but I am. It's been 13 years for me, and it is a daily practice to stay grounded and to stay connected. And I just want to encourage everybody that's listening today to up your self-care. I mean, seasonally, I think this is a hard time with transitions, kids going back to school if you're a parent. The summer's starting to come to a close, the weather's changing, people are feeling a lot of financial burdens with the state of the economy, and politically things that are going on, and it can feel so overwhelming. And I encourage you to put your blinders on. And it can feel so cliche when people say, be grateful, and, write your gratitude list. But it works. It works for me. It works for the hundreds of clients I've worked with. It can be as simple as, I woke up today. I had a warm meal. I had a hot cup of coffee. I had an exchange with a friend. I laughed. Those are the things that I think sometimes we take for granted. It's in the little moments, not the big moments. It can be in the big moments, and we try to hold on to that and make those things happen, whether it's, the big vacation or the promotion at work, or a kid getting into college, and feeling all of those things. But it can also just be in our daily exchanges, and I'm reminded of that today. And you know, this news has shook me to my core. And I'm hearing a lot of people say that because, Hayden had a really long professional life in the industry. And as somebody who's married to an actor, I know how taxing that can be, and the judgment and the rejection and the highs and lows. And from what I understand and have read in her book, she got into the industry at 11 months old in a commercial. And she continued down that path as a child actor in a soap opera, and continued growing up in the limelight. And as we've seen with a lot of childhood celebrity actors, it can be a really rough road. And so I have a lot of empathy for that. And, I like to see that people are rallying and supporting and sharing their stories in solidarity. And be gentle with yourself. I'm going to be gentle with myself. I'm going to put my grief and pain into action, because yes, this is about Hayden's story, but it's also about um, all the women that I've worked with who have struggled with mental health and addiction issues. And so that's what this brings up for me, is that the struggle is real, and that we are never alone, and that we need to lean on one another. And my hope is that there are continued conversations moving forward. There are so many resources out there. I will put the link to purchase Hayden's book in the show notes. My book is also behind me, Myself, an autobiography of survival, the second edition. Um, Survival, Recovery, and Empowerment. I added those words to the second edition. My film, Gray Area, that is about my own journey struggling with alcohol use disorder and trauma and mental health issues, relationship with my husband, raising 4 children, and then also free resources. I will provide a link to Alcoholics Anonymous, where you can find meetings in your own community. She Recovers is a wonderful online resource that offers meetings. There are sober coaches out there, therapists. Recovery.com is a great resource for anybody who is seeking a higher level of care outside of therapy. And individual therapy. And I'm just going to continue to partner with other people who are doing the work that I'm doing so that we can have a larger impact, because I don't want anybody suffering in silence, and suffering in silence kills people. And I know that sounds really dramatic, but I I've witnessed it over and over again in my personal life, my professional life, and in the media as well. So thank you so much for listening. The call to action this week is to reach out to somebody that you know that might be struggling, or somebody that seems to be doing okay, and just ask how they're doing or what's going on in their life, whether that's a phone call or a text message or an email. People have told me that can make all of the difference. And just a friendly reminder, as I end every podcast episode, to be the change you wish to see in the world, whether that starts with yourself, within your family, your community, or the world. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your week.